Welcome to DasGeek. I am so excited to share this video with you about openSUSE. So recently on the Destination Linux podcast, which I am one of 4 hosts on, you've got Noah from the Ask Noah Show, Michael Tennell from This Week in Linux, Zebedee Boss out there on the Zeb's YouTube channel, and you have me. So you have 3 good ones and then me. But in any case, it's an amazing podcast. Go check it out and download it. There's also a YouTube channel that you need to subscribe to. And we have an interview with Richard Brown from openSUSE. It's in-depth. It's absolutely amazing. So weeks leading up to that, we like to do our research. So I installed openSUSE on several computers. One of the things that I don't like to do is a ton of just different random distro reviews as they come out. And most of the channels I see do it, put them on VMs. And it doesn't really give you a good chance to understand if a distro, functions properly on various hardware and some of the little quirks and things that different distros can have if you're just doing it in a VM. But if you install it on bare metal, then you start really kind of understanding it and spending weeks with it and start understanding the little things that work and the little things that don't. And also, a lot of these reviews that you see, they kind of open the file manager like, yeah, well, it looks like it's using Dolphin. It's really interesting there. And they got some new icons set here. And, it looks like this is what they chose for the wallpaper. And it's just not that exciting. But there are certain things that happen where, in this case, I tried openSUSE way back in the day. I've only been in Linux. I guess I'm on my 4th year now. But back in the day when I knew very little about Linux, I tried openSUSE. I had some issues with the installer. It just didn't feel right. Things weren't working correctly. And I hadn't really looked at it a lot since. So obviously I've learned a lot in the meantime, and they've done a ton of work on the distro in the meantime. Now, right now I'm on Tumbleweed, and just today they released Leap 15.1, which is their more regular release distribution version. I don't like to say stable because I think, and I'm a huge fan of rolling releases like Arch, as you know, which is still on the beast, but I have a new 1 terabyte Samsung 860, which now has openSUSE Tumbleweed on it, which is their version of a rolling release. Kind of think of Arch there, like a pure Arch. But obviously there's a lot of differences there, but rolling release is what I'm saying compared to the Arch, where they're constantly releasing the latest and greatest assets out there. I do believe they do a lot of testing. You can see they say fast, integrated, stabilized, and tested. So obviously they do testing a lot more than other rolling releases. So they're trying to get that stability in there with the rolling release, which, Linux in its history has a bad reputation for rolling releases. In fact, everybody, when I switched to Arch, are like, good luck, you're going to crash every day. But I've not had that in months now, running Arch on every single computer. And you know how many I have. No crashes. None. So I think my experience helps overcome certain things like getting certain software installed on it or figuring out how to install Arch. But this rolling release with Tumbleweed, you don't need to learn special, voodoo in the terminal to figure out how to install it. It has a beautiful installer called YaST. And that installer is going to take you through each thing, and it all makes sense. And one of the issues I remember in the past with openSUSE was the way it did its partition choosing with your drive. So if you had 4 drives in there, it was like putting random partitions on each of the 4 drives instead of just selecting one. And that was with its, automatic setup. It was just kind of a silly default, but that's gone. Those days are done. Like when I installed it now on all of my machines that I have, pretty much, I think now, maybe except one, have openSUSE Tumbleweed on it. It recognized the drives, whether it was laptop or not, and was able to do the install with no issue. There is one little quirk in the install process when it comes to Wi-Fi. It will detect your hardware just fine, but when you're going to have to go into the settings and just check the box that says DHCP, unless of course you have a IP address, static IP address that you assign to your machines, then you would put that in its place. Once you check that DHCP, search for network, it's going to find your network. You put in your password to log on to your Wi-Fi and you're good to go, just like any other distribution there. But that's one little quirk that's in there with that you've got to do that extra step with DHCP if you're using that to assign IP addresses to your hardware. So YaST is the installer, but YaST is also one of the most incredible tools inside of openSUSE that you've ever played with, that I've ever played with. I don't know, some people hold on to the past, much like with rolling releases. Rolling releases aren't stable. You can't have a rolling release that's stable. And they're going to hold on to that for their whole life because back in the day when 5 people supported, a distro and it was a rolling release and it wasn't stable, that was their experience and they're going to hold that with them forever. They're never going to look at it again. And so I hear people say, oh, YaST, I don't like YaST, but I don't know what there is not to love about YaST. It is what every distribution, I think, attempts to do, where they try to create a control center where everything's there, all your settings are there, and it's well organized and laid out, and you can get to everything, but they all fail at miserably. And then there's YaST, which actually is the holy grail of control centers, in my opinion. When you go into YaST, everything you're going to need to do within your system, other than run another piece of software, is here really for you to do. So you have the ability to go into, of course, add different software repositories. And I suggest, this is another quirk, that when you do, you're going to want to go ahead and install the community repositories here. And the reason for that is the community repositories have things like the codecs and additional software out there that the community supports. A lot of it is very necessary, at least for my workflow, to have. So I definitely suggest you engage that. That's one thing I would love to see them improve, is just when you go to the software management tool, maybe just having a checkbox that says I think Fedora has done this with where it just pops up and says, do you want to install, I forget what theirs is called, like or PM Fusion, in a little box, and you click yes. I think that would just make it easier for newer users versus having to go in there and search for community, add it in, ignore some of the verifications, that type of silliness. So from here, we can search for packages that we want, like OBS Studio, for instance, and we can click on it, checkbox it, click accept. It's going to install it for you. Even when you download packages like RPM packages, and you download them and go to install them, you can install them using this. It'll open this, install it, find the dependencies. It does a fantastic job at that and get you fully up and running. So all of your software management, removing software, adding software, we can even remove stuff from here, is done here. Now, this is another cool thing. You want to change your desktop environment? No problem. Let's do KDE as the desktop. I think it's actually Plasma. But let's go here. So if I just click on patterns there, now you see that it switches. I didn't even have to search. You just switch to pattern view, and you can see they have some patterns set up. So I can go here and install GNOME. If I want to switch to the GNOME desktop, I can install XFCE, LXD, LXQT, Enlightenment, Mate, and just with a checkbox. And what I like about this is instead of just installing a part of XFCE, just giving you the desktop and none of the plugins and none of the things that make XFCE great, it gives you a lot of the setup that you would get if you installed this as your default desktop environment if you were changing desktops. Now I'm in KDE right now, but if I wanted to install XFCE because I want to switch there, I can just go to that patterns view, click that, and then I can add in any of the additional packages, patterned packages that are associated with it, any of these plugins or anything I want. Click accept, install, and I'm good to go. I can also then go here after I've installed that and logged into XFCE. I can then go and remove KDE. I've done this on my laptop where I've moved desktop environments, which a lot of people say, don't ever do it. It's going to mess up your whole system. Works flawlessly in openSUSE. So that to me is awesome. I love all the information that you get on packages as well, the technical data, dependencies, the file list of what it's going to install, and change logs that have happened recently. Just everything in YaST is made to inform you to the absolute maximum ability that it can, of information that it can pull. And that's what I like it. And it's all in one spot. I can't touch on every single part of YaST because the video would be forever. I could do a whole video, maybe I will, just on YaST and its awesomeness. But you can see we can look at our hardware info, and it's going to run a probe on our hardware and give us a whole list, which you'll see in a moment, of all of our hardware. I can set up printers. Now, all of my laptops worked perfectly setting up my Wi-Fi based printers. On my desktop, I had to go here, which is wired into the Ethernet. I actually had to go into cups to find it. And I don't know, it's probably a stupid printer issue. I thought I'd mention that. Scanners, sound, Etsy sysconfig editor. If you want to do some Etsy sysconfig configuration changes, you can do some of that in here. And this would be situation. Oh, here's our hardware info, and we'll get back to that and I'll show you. So BIOSes, we can look at our display information. You can see I'm running the Radeon 7. We get all of the various details of that card. Just brilliant, right? You get everything you could possibly want in the Etsy sysconfig editor. So if we go under desktop here, just to show you in display managers, you can set up change different tasks here, just like if you were running this in the terminal. If you were going to, Vim, Etsy sysconfig, you could change those obviously through the terminal, through your editor, but through Vim. But here you can do it all through the graphical GUI here. Configure bootloader, date and time, network setting, kernel settings. So configure low-level system options, disk partitioner is in there, service manager to, configure running services and what runs at default, create new directory services, new Kerberos, host names, NFS. I mean, everything you could imagine administration-wise is here, including setting up your firewalls, configuring AppArmor, adding new users, install hypervisors. So listen, I'm guilty of taking VirtualBox and using that to run my VMs. KVM and XEN are, they're not hard to set up, but it's just easier just to install VirtualBox and go through that process. All that up until I use their virtualization tool here, which makes installing KVM and a virtual machine actually easier than using VirtualBox. And you get the benefit of the KVM and XEN, which just are much, much faster and overall compatible virtual machines than you're going to get out of a VirtualBox instance. You have your release notes here for your distro. So instead of having to go to a website and search for release notes, they're right here. I can look at all the things that have changed in the latest version of release. You have support options. Now, support, I'm not sure why it does this, but here is another quirk in this. When you click open the portal here, and I plan to open a bug report on Bugzilla for this, you see how it tries to open file, home, and then it goes to this website. I think what it's supposed to do, correct me if I'm wrong for those SUSE fans out there, is just go to this website here and not add in all of the file stuff in there. I don't know. I think that's maybe what it's supposed to do, or maybe I just don't understand what it's doing. But you can create reports here or upload data to specific websites. So if you are trying to get an issue fixed and you need that support, they may ask you for logs, and you can do that from one place. You have alternatives, file system snapshots. So one of the neat things about openSUSE, I say neat, some people, again, based on their history of using it when it was new, they use the ButterFS file system. Now, before, if you're one of those people like, I will never touch that thing, that's fine. You can still install openSUSE on ext4. It gives you that option during the install process if you don't want to use ButterFS. But one of the advantages of ButterFS is the snapshot ability. So after you do an update, it will create basically in your grub menu a snapshot of your previous version before the update, and you'll have, of course, your current version. So if the current version doesn't boot, doesn't work, you can always roll back to that latest version. There are a bunch of other advantages with ButterFS as well out there, but you can go check that out in the look it up online and see all the different things that it offers. But for most people, you're not even going to really notice it's back there, other than you're going to really appreciate it at the point where, maybe an update has done something, especially if you're on NVIDIA or something like that, where proprietary drivers tend to sometimes mess up the system. And you can just roll back to the prior kernel version and not have to worry about that at all. All right, so one of the things I wanted to show you was the cheat sheet I kind of created for Tumbleweed here. Now, I am not an expert. This is what I use to make it work for all of my machines and all the software that I like to have on my machine. But make sure you look through this and understand it before you just go online and start running code. I mean, come on, people, we're not Windows users here. So the first suggestion here is, of course, to add the community repositories. And so just a quick note there. The next one is the software that I like to install. So this is for my YubiKeys here. And, I keep my YubiKeys on some DasGeek Swag on my necklace. Well, I usually do, but it's actually plugged into my computer right now. Along with, this is a USB dog tag here, but this pops out and is actually a USB drive. So I keep rescue disk on there. Yes, I'm a geek, and my YubiKey on there that goes around my neck. But the YubiKey integration, using it for my computer to log into it, to get through password managers, etc., that is all done through YubiKey. So that's why I installed that. Chromium's in there, Telegram, Desktop, Fish, Steam, Kdenlive, OBS Studio, Inkscape, Tilix, Calibre, Krita, Flameshot, GovCView for webcam, all of the software that I like to have in an install in just one command. So you could just take this, copy, paste it right into a terminal and install it. Now, one of the things that's different about openSUSE is it uses Zypper instead of Aptitude if you're in Ubuntu, or DNF if you're used to Fedora. So it uses the Zypper command in there in its place, but for the most part, like all of these different tools, they're interchangeable. You know, it's Zypper install, apt install, DNF install. It's all kind of very similar commands. There's a little bit of differences here, like when you're doing a full system upgrade, you do Zypper DUP. So there are a couple differences, but for the most part, you'll get it really quick. Install codecs. This is one of the quirks that I think they need to work on. I get it. At the end of the day, what happened is you have all of these codecs that basically have a bunch of licenses. This is not free and open source. People can get sued if they just go out there and, you know, publish this or provide these packages by default. The question you may be asked is, well, how does Ubuntu do it and some others? Well, they have a little box that says install add-ons. And by you checking that box, essentially, they're working around that license in a way to basically say that they didn't install it by default. You chose to install it. So it's kind of this gray area. And that's my understanding of it. It could be a little different, but essentially that's it. Ubuntu's found a workaround for it. It really relies on the user kind of checking it and installing it. Whereas other distros like Fedora and openSUSE, they don't play that gray area. So you've got to manually go install it. Unfortunately, there's no one-click install that I've really found. Now, there are some in the openSUSE software online, some places that say install multimedia codecs, but it never gave me everything that I needed, at least this stuff here. So you can just do the Zypper install and install these codecs. I really wish they would find a workaround, much like Ubuntu and others have, to make this easier. So this can stop you from watching certain types of videos. Streaming services like Twitch and things won't work until you install some of these codecs. So it's kind of a little bit of an annoyance there, but it's pretty easy to overcome. So just go to DasGeekCommunity.com, and all of this, if you want to see any of my tips and tricks, are under Brain Dump, and I just add random pages here. But I also have a Fedora cheat sheet for things in here, and I have openSUSE cheat sheet, and of course my GitHub links for any software things that I've done. But hopefully that will help you. And then one tip or trick, man, can I not talk today, is to basically utilize, I've already talked about the KVM or Zen for your virtual machines. So overall, my opinion of openSUSE after spending some weeks with it here is it's a rolling release, which gets it a huge check mark in my box. Rolling release is the future for Linux on the desktop. It is not a situation where you have to have rolling release, therefore it's not stable. And I think I'm going to be very happy with Tumbleweed. My guess is it's probably more stable than Arch, and Arch is ridiculously stable for me. In fact, I had an install of Arch where I hadn't used the computer in weeks, booted up, everything worked, ran the update, everything's great. If you are on NVIDIA, though, you may have a different experience, and that's because NVIDIA uses proprietary drivers and sometimes breaks things across the board. And so most of the people, I think, that have stability issues with rolling releases are not on an Intel GPU or an AMD GPU. They are on an NVIDIA GPU, and that's just what you get for being NVIDIA, I guess. So trade in for an AMD as soon as you can, and you'll be fine. I think that's a lot to do with the rumors of things not being stable. The other great thing is because Tumbleweed's on the latest kernel, it automatically is going to support the latest hardware. That means Radeon 7, boom, works right out of the box. That means when the new video card releases, boom, it's going to work right out of the box as long as AMD's put the drivers within the kernel. And since so many hardware vendors are doing that now, from Logitech to Wacom to all of this, being on a rolling release means you'll always have the ability to plug in the latest and greatest hardware you buy and it will work. Being on the stable releases, meaning you may have to wait 6 months to a year before it will work. So that's why I'm just a huge fan of a rolling release model. And I'm very excited to continue to use Tumbleweed and Arch together and see if any of them will break at any point. And if they do, I will do a video on it. So you will know. There's no reason for me to hide it, but I think it's absolutely possible to have a complete rolling release and have it be stable as well. And in fact, a lot of people act like the non-rolling releases are super stable. They're not always very stable either. I mean, in Fedora 30, when it first launched, it had a lot of bugs that were issues for me. When it first came out, Ubuntu 19.04, the same thing. These are all supposed to be stable releases. Now, 1904 wasn't an LTS, but it's still supposed to be a stable release. It's not a rolling release, and there's still bugs in there. They fix it and they move on. I don't see anything different here. If you have a big enough team and you have a good support staff, you should be able to do a rolling release and have it stable. And I think that's why they emphasize there. So overall, I'm really digging that part of it. I don't have any issues with the ButterFS file system yet. Some people have had problems in the past, and maybe I'll come across them in the future. But thankfully, I have the FreeNAS system in there that's backing up my data constantly, so I don't really have to worry about that. If ButterFS lost some files or something, it would have already been backed up. But I don't think that's going to happen. I think they've overcome all of those issues with ButterFS. And if you don't want to use that, you can still use ext4. There's a couple quirks in there that I mentioned. My biggest problem actually with openSUSE, and the reason why I couldn't use it full time as a primary distro, is because, and this isn't openSUSE's fault, Lightworks doesn't work in openSUSE. So there's an RPM that's available for Lightworks. I have tried every workaround out there known to mankind where you're linking certain files to get you this libcrypto SO10 and downloading it from Fedora, and Lightworks works in Fedora. It's an RPM package. It was kind of made for Fedora and Red Hat and works in Ubuntu, but does not, unfortunately. There's some missing libraries or things that keep it from working in openSUSE, and I can't get around it. Now, it's a proprietary piece of software, and so I've wrote a letter to Lightworks asking them if they would, consider doing some support work there, because I know openSUSE team is willing to help out if they can package this for them while still keeping their licensing information intact. So hopefully they will get back to me and we can get that resolved. But that would be one of the only reasons I couldn't move to it, because I like to use Lightworks as my video editor. For this video, I'll probably use Kdenlive or Olive in place, and they're very good and capable. I just like being in Lightworks, and I spent money on it and kind of feel like I got to use it. So there you go with that. The team is super friendly out there on the forums and very supportive. To me, that's a sign of a good community. Go look at the forums and see how people interact with each other, and nothing but goodness there. I was looking through the forums yesterday and looking at ways I could contribute. Very, very nice. So ultimately, my take is, so far, Tumbleweed is amazing. My favorite distro this year so far is pure Arch. But openSUSE, if it continues to run as solid as it is, and we can get a little bit of these quirks fixed, out there, and I can help with some bug reports and things, which I'm going to do, then I think very well at the end of the year, when I say what's the best distro of the year, it could very well be openSUSE. We'll see. So anyways, let me know in your comments below, have you checked out openSUSE lately, being the key word? And what are your thoughts on it? Do you love the distro? Is there certain little things that you don't like about it? Let me know in the comments below. And if there's something you want to see in the future with openSUSE, I would be willing to do more videos on it in the future. And until next time, get out there and fill your brains.
Don't forget to subscribe. If you like the video.